Long before Anne Frank became the voice of a stolen childhood, there were the silent figures who risked everything to keep her alive. Their names were less known, their faces rarely remembered, but without them the diary would never have existed. Behind the famous bookcase in Prinsengracht 263 were not only 8 people in hiding, but an entire network of guardians keeping watch from the outside. The Secret Annex was a world suspended in fear and hope. Inside Anne wrote about moods, dreams, quarrels, and longing. But outside, in the daylight streets of Amsterdam, her helpers lived a double life. One face for the world, another for the hidden family upstairs. Every errand was a risk. Every knock at the door could bring death. The Dutch resistance was growing, but the Gestapo's grip tightened daily. Curfews, rationing, arrests, all could expose a single misstep. The helpers learned quickly, survival meant invisibility. They had to appear ordinary in a world where ordinary had become suspicious. And never saw the weight they carried. She could not feel the tremor in their hands as they climbed the stairs with food. She did not see the sweat on their brows as they forged ration cards, or the fear in their eyes when someone lingered too long near the warehouse door. Their story is not only about courage, it's about the quiet heroism that never asks for praise. It is about people who stepped into darkness, not because they were fearless, but because conscience would not let them stand aside. When history remembers Anne Frank, it remembers innocence and tragedy. But behind her survival, however brief, were ordinary people whose extraordinary actions shaped one of the most powerful stories ever written. This is their story, the secret life of Anne Frank's helpers, told in the shadows where they stood. Of all the helpers, Miep Gies became the heartbeat of the Secret Annex. Small in stature, soft-spoken, and gentle, she seemed an unlikely hero. Yet she possessed a quiet bravery that even the Nazis failed to detect. She was the one who brought groceries, newspapers, and whispers of the outside world, the threads that kept the hidden family connected to life. Each morning, Miep woke with a fear that never left her. She walked through the city carrying bags that might contain contraband or ration goods bought on the black market. If stopped, she had rehearsed stories, excuses, lies. She prayed she would never have to use them. At the office, she played her role perfectly, the efficient secretary. But upstairs, beyond the swinging bookcase, her presence became oxygen. She brought bread, potatoes, the latest jokes from the streets, and even Anne's favorite cosmetics when she could. She sensed the tension in the annex, the arguments, the claustrophobia, and softened it with kindness. Miep never once let the fear turn her away. "I am not a hero," she insisted later in life. "I did what any decent person would have done. But few could have done what she did, not with such tenderness, not under such danger." At times she blamed herself for not doing more, for not having the power to stop the war. Yet her greatest gift was not food or supplies. It was dignity, the feeling that, even in hiding, the Franks were still human beings, still part of the world. And when the annex fell, it was Miep who walked into the wreckage, found Anne's scattered diary pages on the floor, and gathered them not as papers, but as pieces of a life she had tried so hard to protect. Without Miep Gies there would be no diary of Anne Frank. Victor Kugler, tall and serious, was the man who handled the practical side of survival. He took care of finances, ration cards, forged documents, the logistical web that kept the annex functioning. He was a businessman by training, but wartime demanded something far greater: the ability to lie convincingly, to improvise, to stay calm under pressure. Every day Victor worked mere feet from armed German patrols. Amsterdam was crawling with police raids and random inspections. One wrong word, one suspicious visitor, and everything would collapse. Victor learned to anticipate danger like a man who could smell smoke before seeing flames. He kept the warehouse running so that no outsider would grow curious. He shielded deliveries from prying eyes, altered schedules, and crafted excuses for noises upstairs. He was constantly alert, watching windows, checking hallways, scanning the street for unfamiliar faces. His courage was not impulsive but deliberate, the kind that grows from responsibility rather than bravado. He felt personally accountable for every soul in the annex. When he locked the office door each night, he whispered a silent promise: "Tomorrow I will protect you again," and admired him for his steadiness. She wrote that Victor always seemed composed, even when the world outside felt like it was crumbling. But what she could not see were the nights he went home exhausted, shaking, haunted by the fear that he might fail them. When the Nazis eventually stormed the building, Victor did not abandon the annex. He tried to stand between the captors and the hidden family. His bravery ended in handcuffs, but not in defeat. He survived the camps, carrying the memory of the annex with him for the rest of his life. Victor Kugler was not made for war, yet war made him indispensable. Johannes Kleiman, older and friendlier than the others, was the unexpected strategist of the group. A mild-mannered man with glasses and a gentle handshake, he possessed a mind that could see angles others missed. His contribution was not in carrying vegetables or forging ration carts, it was in building the illusion of normality. Johannes knew that safety depended not on walls, but on the perception of those who walked past them. He developed systems. When deliveries could be made, which workers to avoid, which excuses sounded most believable. He understood how to keep suspicion asleep. He had suffered from stomach ailments for years, yet he never hesitated to take risks. Sometimes he used his own illness as a cover, leaving the office at odd hours under the guise of medical needs, when in fact he was securing supplies or checking the annex entrance. He frequently met with Dutch resistance contacts, gathering rumors, warnings, and hints about police raids in the area. These crumbs of intelligence were often the difference between caution and catastrophe. His nerves were fragile, but his determination was steel. And found him fatherly, always patient even when tensions flared. She once wrote that he brought calm like a warm coat. His presence reminded the annex occupants that the world outside still held decency, even when decency seemed extinct. When the annex was betrayed, Kleiman fought back physically against the officers who stormed the office. Later, in a cell, he prayed for the hidden family he had failed to save. What he never understood was that without him, they would not have survived even those 2 precious years. Johannes Kleiman preserved the illusion that allowed hope to breathe. Bep Voskuijl was only 23, the youngest of the helpers, yet she carried burdens that would crush most adults. She worked in the office by day, but her real work began when the doors closed. She brought milk, medicine, envelopes, books, clothing, always slipping items into her bag with practiced subtlety. She was shy by nature, terrified of confrontation, yet her courage ran deeper than any loud declaration. Her father built the bookcase that concealed the annex. Her brothers forged ration cards. The Voskuijls became an invisible lifeline threaded through the walls of Prinsengracht. For and Bep was a kind of older sister, someone who understood youth, fashion, and frustrations. Bep brought her Latin books, pencils, soap, even a powder compact and treasured. In those small gestures she gave in what the war had stolen, the feeling of being a normal girl. But every visit came with danger. Bep's cheeks often flushed with fear when police walked by. She avoided eye contact, rehearsed alibis, and tried not to tremble when German uniforms appeared unexpectedly. At home she told no one, not even friends, about the annex. She carried secrets like lead in her pocket. When the Gestapo raided the building, Bep fled before she could be arrested. She returned later that day to find the annex silent and empty, and the diary pages scattered across the floor. Overwhelmed, she ran to Miep. "We must take them. We must keep something of them alive." Her youth never returned to her. The war carved her into someone older, sadder, but fiercely loyal. She lived the rest of her life in the shadow of the annex, grateful for the lives she tried to save and haunted by the ones she could not. Bep Voskuijl was proof that bravery doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers and still changes history. Outside the secret annex, Amsterdam was tightening like a noose. Raids were random. Cars with covered windows prowled the streets at night. The helpers learned to read danger the way sailors read storms. In subtle shifts of silence, in footsteps behind them, in the uneasy glances of passers-by. Every day became a choreography of caution. Miep had to avoid the butcher who asked too many questions. Victor changed suppliers constantly so no one would notice the amount of food passing through their doors. Bep learned how to shop in small quantities, never from the same market so as not to attract attention. Each decision carried risk, a choice of which stair creaked less, which cupboard could hide documents in an instant, which workers in the warehouse could be trusted not to ask why footsteps sometimes drifted down from the attic. They were constantly on guard for the small mistakes, the kind that, in wartime, could be fatal. A loud laugh from the annex. A dropped spoon. A cough when delivery men were on the ground floor. Life behind the bookcase depended not only on courage but on silence, timing, and luck. The helper's nerves frayed under the strain. Miep's stomach knotted with fear every time she passed a German soldier. Bep often cried quietly at home, exhausted by the dual life she led. Victor lost weight, barely sleeping more than a few hours each night. And yet none of them stopped. Their loyalty became a kind of defiance. Quiet, unarmed, but powerful. In a world built on cruelty, their persistence was an act of rebellion. Every loaf of bread smuggled into the annex was a victory. Every day the Franks remained hidden was a small triumph over tyranny. The war outside was brutal. But the secret war inside Prinsengracht 263, the war of secrecy, trust, and survival, was just as fierce. By 1943, food in Amsterdam was scarce. Ration lines stretched for blocks, and arguments often erupted between desperate families. Bread grew smaller each week. Potatoes were shriveled, sometimes rotten. Sugar disappeared entirely. Meat became a rumor. For the Franks, Van Pelzes, and Fritz Pfeffer in the Annex, eating became an exercise in gratitude and restraint. Every bite was measured, every crumb saved. The helpers bore the terrible task of dividing too little among too many. Miep and Bep bartered what they could. They waited hours in lines, swapped goods on the black market, and even traded clothing for food. More than once, Miep went without meals so the Annex could have enough. She told no one, not even her husband. Yet despite the hardship, they brought small comforts. A bag of apples. A little fondant for Anne's birthday. Once, impossibly, Bep found a tin of strawberries. And wrote about that tin as if it were treasure, a miracle amid hunger. The helpers' generosity extended beyond food. They carried messages, birthday gifts, stockings, library books. When and worried about falling behind in school, Kleiman brought her reading material. When the Annex needed vitamins, Miep convinced a pharmacist to look the other way. But the greatest gift the helpers brought was normality. Newspapers with smuggled headlines. Gossip from the neighbors. Handwritten notes from trusted friends. Each detail connected the Annex to the world outside, a world they longed for but no longer belonged to. In a time when starvation loomed over the city, hope was as essential as bread. And hope was what the helpers delivered, day after day, even when their own cupboards were empty. The helpers were brave, but they were not fearless. Each lived with a private terror they rarely voiced. They feared betrayal, from neighbors, co-workers, even relatives who might talk without realizing the consequences. Victor's nightmares often woke him. He saw Gestapo boots on the stairs, heard shouting, imagined the Annex door broken open. Even in daylight, he checked every window twice, every lock 3 times. Danger, he felt, was a smell that lingered, always near. Bep lived with guilt. She felt torn between her loyalty to the Annex and her responsibility to her family. Her mother urged her to stop helping. "It's too dangerous, Bee, you're still a girl." But she refused. The fear of abandoning the Franks frightened her more than the Gestapo. Miep's greatest fear was being followed. Whenever she carried bags of food, she walked unpredictable routes, sometimes doubling back to make sure no one trailed her. She kept her face neutral on the tram, avoiding even friendly conversation. And then there was Jan Gies, Miep's husband, who played a quieter but equally critical role, securing ration cards through the underground and passing along resistance intelligence. Jan lived in the shadows, balancing secrecy with the need to protect Miep. They each had moments when they wanted to give up, days when the pressure felt unbearable. But the decision was always the same: they would continue. The Annex depended on them. Their fear was real, but their conscience was stronger. It wasn't heroism that kept them going, it was humanity. A simple refusal to look away from suffering. A belief that even in the darkest times, kindness was worth the risk. As the war dragged on, the helpers watched Amsterdam descend into misery. Jews disappeared daily, neighbors, co-workers, school friends. Shops were boarded up. Homes stood empty. Each time a bicycle was left chained to a post, they wondered if its owner had been taken the night before. Inside the Annex, the Franks lived in suspended time. Outside, the city rotted under fear. Miep passed piles of confiscated goods, radios, furniture, clothing, taken from deported families. Once she saw a child's doll lying in the street, its dress torn, left behind after a raid. She ran home and cried for an hour. Kleiman listened anxiously to BBC broadcasts on a hidden radio. Reports of Allied defeats or delays brought dread. If help didn't come soon, how long could everyone survive? He feared not only German raids but starvation, exhaustion, betrayal. Victor watched Nazi trucks roll by with factory workers being deported to forced labor. He knew the next truck could be for him, and if he were taken, the Annex would no longer be safe. Even Bep could not escape the cruelty of the occupation. She saw her classmates wearing yellow stars, then vanishing one by one. She wondered how long before someone questioned why the Franks had not been seen recently. She lied quickly, gracefully. They moved to Switzerland. They left Amsterdam before the raids. They're staying with relatives. Some lies saved lives. Others bought only time. But every lie felt like a shield between the Annex and the abyss. The helpers saw the world collapsing, and still they returned day after day to hold up the fragile shelter of the Annex. The closer the war edged toward its climax, the more dangerous the helpers' work became. The Nazis were growing desperate, and desperate regimes are the most violent. Rewards were offered for information about Jews in hiding. Spies infiltrated neighborhoods. Even Dutch informants roamed the streets, eager for money or favor. A stranger had begun lingering outside the warehouse. Victor noticed him first, a man who seemed to be watching the building more often than coincidence allowed. He informed Kleiman, who quietly altered delivery schedules and told the annex to stay silent for longer hours. There were other warning signs. A worker in the warehouse asked too many questions about the upstairs floor. A mail carrier mentioned hearing footsteps. A neighbor remarked, "Your office is busy these days, isn't it?" A comment that chilled Bep to the bone. Miep sensed the fear in everyone's voices. She started whispering when she climbed the stairs, even when the annex was quiet. She began buying food late at night to avoid crowds. She felt the noose tightening, the sense that something unseen was closing in. And in the annex itself, tensions rose. The occupants argued over small things: food portions, study time, noise. They were exhausted, trapped, afraid that each sunrise might be their last. And wrote of the growing dread: the door that creaked too loudly, the phone ringing unexpectedly, the footsteps that sounded wrong. The helpers tried to reassure them. They smiled, brought treats, carried news of hope. But secretly they felt the same unease. The danger that had been distant now felt close, close enough to touch. And then, one August morning, the noose finally snapped. On the morning of August 4, 1944, the office door swung open with a force that cracked the silence. Men in green uniforms, German security police, marched inside. Their boots echoed like gunshots across the warehouse floor. The helpers knew instantly: the unthinkable had happened. The annex had been betrayed. Victor Kugler was the first to see them. He tried to block the stairs, his voice steady but his hands shaking. "This is a private office," he insisted. The officer smiled coldly and pushed him aside. The search began. Upstairs, and then the others froze as the door behind the bookcase swung open. It had always been a symbol of safety, now it was the doorway to terror. A German officer shouted for everyone to line up. And later scribbled her final words in the diary: "We are being taken away." Downstairs, chaos unfolded. Victor was dragged from his chair and beaten. Johannes Kleiman, despite his frailty, fought back until he was thrown against a desk. Miep and Bep arrived moments later, unaware of the raid. A German officer barred their path. Miep looked into the annex stairwell and whispered, "Please, don't go up there." The officer ignored her. Within minutes, 8 people were marched down the stairs, terrified, disheveled, carrying nothing but the clothes on their backs. And just 15 clutched her diary instinctively, but an officer ripped it from her hand and tossed it aside. To the helpers, the sight was unbearable, watching the people they had protected for 2 years dragged into trucks like criminals. Bep covered her mouth to keep from crying. Miep stepped forward before being shoved away. She whispered to herself, "I have failed them. I have failed." The door slammed shut. The trucks drove off. And just like that, the annex, their hidden world, was gone. Victor Kugler and Johannes Kleiman were arrested on the spot. The officers accused them of harboring Jews, helping traitors, and aiding resistance activity. They were taken to the headquarters of the Sicherheitsdienst, a place known for brutality. Victor endured repeated interrogations. Officers demanded names of other Jews in hiding, resistance cells, and forged ration card networks. Each question was a trap. The more he refused to answer, the harder they hit him. He never spoke a single name. Kleiman, suffering from stomach ulcers and weakened by stress, struggled to stand during questioning. Yet he too refused to speak. His strength came not from muscle but from principle, the same principle that had kept the annex alive. Meanwhile, Miep and Bep waited in terror, expecting arrest at any moment. Surprisingly, the officers let them go. Perhaps they seemed harmless, 2 women, one young and trembling, the other soft-spoken and mild. Or perhaps fate intervened. Miep's Austrian accent confused the German officer. He mistook her for one of our own, and waved her away. Miep did not run home. She ran back into the building the moment the officers left. She searched every room of the annex. It was ransacked, overturned beds, broken furniture, papers scattered everywhere. And there, on the floor beneath Anne's small desk, lay thousands of handwritten pages. Miep recognized them immediately. She knelt, gathered the crumpled papers gently and whispered, "Oh, Anne, I will keep them for you. I promise." She did not read a single word. She thought and would need them when she returned. But the war had other plans. After the raid, the building at Prinsengracht fell silent, too silent. The helpers came only when they had to, wary of being watched. The rooms that had once echoed with whispered conversations and the soft scratching of Anne's pen were now empty. Miep hid Anne's diary in her desk drawer, the pages wrapped carefully in cloth. She checked on them every day as though they were alive. She believed with all her heart that Anne would come back for them. She could not bear the thought of reading the words of a girl who might already be dead. Bep avoided the warehouse entirely. Every corner reminded her of Anne's smile, Margot's calm voice, Mrs. Frank's quiet gratitude. She missed them painfully, knowing that she had seen them alive for the last time as they were taken away. Victor and Kleiman were held in different prisons. They endured harsh conditions, lice, cold floors, interrogations. Yet both survived, eventually released because the Nazis needed room for more dangerous prisoners. Their survival was an accident of timing. Rumors drifted through Amsterdam, Westerbork Transit Camp, Auschwitz, Bergen-Belsen. No one knew where the annex occupants had been sent. The helpers clung to hope. The war seemed to be turning. Maybe, just maybe, their friends would survive long enough to see liberation. But hope can be cruel. And the winter of 1944 was especially so. When the war finally ended, one by one the helpers learned the truth. Most of the annex occupants had died. Only Otto Frank had survived. Miep could not speak when she heard. She opened her desk drawer, placed a trembling hand on Anne's diary and began to cry. When Otto Frank returned to Amsterdam, he was thin, pale, and hollowed out by grief. He carried the weight of losing his family in every step. Miep embraced him gently, tears filling her eyes. She said only, "I have something that belongs to you." She placed the stack of pages, Anne's diary, into Otto's hands. For a moment he could not breathe. He touched the papers as if they were warm, alive, as if they carried the faint heartbeat of his daughter. He read Anne's words slowly in private. Each sentence was a resurrection. Each passage a wound. Her dreams, her fears, her laughter, all preserved in ink. He saw the girl she was, the writer she was becoming, the young woman she never got the chance to be, and had believed her diary might someday be published. A hope inspired by a radio broadcast calling for wartime diaries after the war. Otto realized she had written not only to escape, but to be remembered. The helpers gathered around him as he read. They cried softly, recognizing their roles in her pages. The jokes, the arguments, the tiny acts of kindness, all captured with Anne's sharp, honest voice. Otto made a decision. The world needed to hear her. But he wanted Anne's diary to be more than a record of suffering. He wanted it to be a testament to her spirit. With great care he prepared the manuscript for publication, preserving Anne's honesty and brilliance. In 1947, the diary of a young girl was printed for the first time. Anne's voice reached beyond the annex, beyond Amsterdam, beyond the war, into the lives of millions. And behind that voice stood the helpers, the invisible guardians who had preserved the pages when nothing else was left. And Frank became one of the most beloved and heartbreaking voices of the 20th century. Her diary was translated, adapted, studied, and cherished across the world. But behind every page, the helper's shadows linger, steady, silent, and often forgotten. Miep Gies lived into her 90s. She spent her life teaching that courage is found in ordinary people doing ordinary things under extraordinary circumstances. She insisted she was no hero, we simply did what we had to do. But the world knew better. Victor Kugler rebuilt his life quietly, carrying the memories of the annex and the scars of imprisonment. He spoke rarely of the war, but when he did, it was with pride. Pride in protecting the Franks, pride in resisting evil in the only way he could. Johannes Kleiman died young, never fully recovering from the toll of the occupation. Yet those who knew him spoke of his gentleness and humility, the man who held the annex together through strategy and sacrifice. Bep Voskuijl lived with both love and sorrow. She never escaped the emotional weight of what happened, but she held on to the truth that she helped keep alive long enough to write her diary, and that mattered. Their legacy is not written in statues or museums, but in the survival of a voice. Because of them, Anne Frank's words became immortal. Because of them, the world heard the story of a girl whose life was taken, but whose spirit endured. They did not defeat the Nazis with guns or armies. They fought with bread, with silence, with lies, with courage, and with love. This is the secret life of Anne Frank's helpers. A story of ordinary people who became extraordinary because humanity demanded it. A story of how, in the darkest years of the 20th century, goodness hid in an office, behind a bookcase, and dared to protect the light of a young girl's hope.